Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Again, my name is Angela Tolosa, and I am the Deputy Program Director for the National Reentry Resource Center here at Council of State Governments Justice Center. Here at the Justice Center, I focus on policies and issues affecting Second Chance Act grantees and other reentry practitioners and providers. I'm going to review the agenda for today's webinar and introduce our speakers in a moment. And I will show you this next slide that gives you an overview of the presentation. We'll be doing first an intro of the Justice Center, overview of speakers, and then we'll be reviewing social impact bonds, the Social Innovation Fund program, as well as hearing about projects from the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, as well as the Corporation for Supportive Housing. At the end of the webinar, we will have time for questions and answers from our guests and attendees, so we're very excited about that. All right, so just to begin, I'd like to take a few minutes to review and introduce the Council of State Governments Justice Center. As many of you know, the Justice Center provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. We focus on work related to reentry, responses to justice-involved individuals with mental illnesses, as well as justice reinvestment. As part of this work, the Justice Center provides technical assistance to both Second Chance Act and Justice and Mental Health Collaboration grantees, and we coordinate the National Reentry Resource Center in partnership with the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the U.S. Department of Justice. Established by the Second Chance Act in 2009, the National Reentry Resource Center provides education, training, and technical assistance to states, tribes, territories, local governments, service providers, nonprofit organizations, and correction institutions working on prisoner reentry. Our online resource center can be accessed at www.csgjusticecenter.org/NRSC and includes publications, news updates, webinars, and other resources designed to help you promote effective reentry practices. We also host the What Worked in Reentry Clearinghouse, which is a database of evidence-based practices for reentry. We encourage you to visit the National Reentry Resource Center page, where we've also added content on social impact bonds in the recent past. And if you aren't already, please register to subscribe for our monthly newsletters, where you will get updates and news on reentry and funding opportunities on a regular basis. Today's webinar focuses on providing a fundamental understanding of Pay for Success and social impact bonds, as well as real-life opportunities for agencies to be potentially involved in future Pay for Success projects. This, to us, is of central importance to anyone interested in effective practices in reentry and also looking to funding and resources to support their work. We're very excited about this webinar as well because it's timely, as we will hear from the Social Innovation Program and grantees who will be releasing in December, so this month essentially, a request for proposals for organizations who would like to participate in Pay for Success feasibility assessment technical assistance through grantees of the Social Innovation Fund. Today's presentation will be given by 4 speakers who will review social impact bonds and Pay for Success, the Social Innovation Fund program, as well as the Social Innovation Fund projects at the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, as well as Corporation for Supportive Housing. After these presentations, we'll move into Q&A. I will explain how to submit Q&A questions as well. To submit a question at any point during the webinar, you can type your question into the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will be able to keep a list of the content-related questions we receive, and then we will ask the panelists at the end of the webinar to respond to the questions. I will moderate this section and segment of the webinar. We will do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter any technical or audio problems, you can contact WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. You can also submit your question through Q&A. We're very, very excited and very pleased to have these experts in the field here with us to give us today's presentation, and I'm happy to introduce them right now. So the first presenter will be Dr. John Roman, who's the lead author of Urban Institute's 5 Steps to Pay for Success project. He is currently leading a team devising tools and techniques for pricing social impact bonds. A leader in the development of SIB theory, he has given numerous talks on the topic to government and philanthropic audiences, including the White House Office of Social Innovation's Pay for Success Working Group. Our second presenter is Jennifer Stoff from the Social Innovation Fund of the Corporation for National and Community Service. She serves as the Senior Program Officer at the fund, and in this capacity, she's working to create a community of social innovation funds, pay for success grantees, and organizations that are catalyzing the national movement of outcomes-based finance for social change. Previously, Jenny served as a special advisor for social innovation in the District of Columbia's Mayor's Office of Budget and Finance. Next presenter will be Deidre O'Connor, a Senior Program Specialist and National Counsel on Crime and Delinquency. Deirdre has had more than 20 years of child welfare experience and an extensive understanding of federal child welfare funding, regulations, and oversight. Within the past few years, her work has expanded to include several Department of Justice-funded projects, including leading roles with the Attorney General's Task Force on Children Exposed to Violence and the National PREA Resource Center. Our last presenter is Stephanie Mercier, who is a Senior Program Manager at Corporation for Supportive Housing. Stephanie provides training, facilitation, and technical assistance to organizations working to address issues of housing and homelessness in their communities. She is a member of the Government Affairs and Innovations team, focusing her efforts on developing the use of social impact investment as a tool to support communities in meeting the needs of their most vulnerable citizens. We're really pleased to have these experts on the line today to talk to you all. Before we jump into our presentation, I'm going to just do a quick poll to find out who's in our audience today. So please see on the right-hand corner at the bottom, you will see a poll question, which you can answer in real time. The question says, please indicate your organization type, and please, in the next 10 seconds, choose which organization type you have, and then we'll be able to see who's here in the audience today. The answers to the poll will show in the next couple seconds. Great. So based on the polling, it looks like we have 30% participation from government agencies, 30% from service providers, 3% from researchers, 2% from potential intermediaries, and then 10% from others, and 20% no answer. Thank you so much for indicating your organization type here. All right, so now we're going to go to our next section, Section 3, Social Impact Bonds and Pay for Success Overview. I turn it over to Dr. John Roman. Thank you.
Good afternoon to everybody who's not on the West Coast, and good morning to those folks who are. So I just want to say one word about who the Urban Institute is and what we do. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit, economic and social policy research organization based in Washington, D.C., and we've been studying social science questions since the 60s. Our role in the Pay for Success world is really to help figure out ways to make these transactions more effective, more efficient, and just better. And we're not sort of, looking to be a part of these transactions, but rather to create a social impact bond, pay for success, social innovation financing ready sector that can bring capital to bear on really important public sector issues that we have been less successful than we'd like to have been in solving in the past. So what is pay for success? So the first thing I should say is, pay for success, social impact bonds, social innovation financing are all different ways to describe what's generally the same concept. And when I talk about these things, what I like to say is that none of these things are today a noun, they're a concept. And we're growing this concept, we're trying to understand where its edges are and how far we can take the idea. So I hope people who are listening to this call don't start with the premise that, Pay for Success, SIF, and SIB are some clearly defined thing that won't evolve. They will evolve. And that's a really important part of the discussion, and it's a really important part, I think, of what we want to discuss today. So what we're really interested in here is creating this new financial instrument to support discretionary social programming to bring evidence-based programs to scale. And one of the stories we like to tell is people who are involved in the criminal justice system know this well, that adult drug courts have been studied dozens, if not hundreds of times, and the overwhelming consensus of the literature is that by keeping people out of corrections who have drug problems and dealing with the underlying drug addiction, we get people better outcomes. And even though there's a consensus that this works, that's nonpartisan, that is sort of agreed upon by educators and practitioners alike, probably less than 3% of people who could potentially be eligible to receive these programs receive them. And that's the point here, is that there just simply isn't the capital to scale these kinds of evidence-based effective programs. And there isn't enough, there's a lot of concern that government bears all the risk if it puts all the capital up front. And what these programs do, Pay for Success, SIF and SIB, is shift that risk from the government to private investors who could be nonprofits, philanthropists, venture capitalists, commercial institutions, to allow these programs to scale. So the kinds of programs we're talking about are those that involve big startup costs but long-term savings, which would be something like family-based therapies, like multi-systemic therapy or family functional therapy, that have big costs up front, and the benefits don't accrue until well down the line. Nurse Family Partnership is another example of this. A lot of prison reentry programs also fit this mold. Or programs that serve large populations, and that could be doing better risk assessments for a prison-based population to try and do better risk needs matching. And doing so will have small average improvements and large costs because of the sheer number of people who are involved in receiving those services, and thus they don't happen. Or involve politically risky populations like people returning from prison, who it's difficult to get budget line items in budgets. So Pay for Success gets private capital, offers people who provide that private capital, whether it's philanthropy, venture capital, or commercial investors, a chance to make a return on that investment if the program meets predetermined performance goals, and government only pays when those performance goals are met. This is known around the world as paying for outcomes, and it's a contract that does that definitively and says government will agree to reimburse investors with a profit if performance targets are met. We call it a social impact bond in some corners of the universe. It does not operate like a bond. The fact that government won't pay when the outcomes are poor won't be the same thing as defaulting on a bond. So it's sort of a misnomer, but that sort of has stuck. Next slide, please. My apologies, I don't know that I have control of, let me try this. There we go. So the way this works is an intermediary, which could be a financial intermediary or a knowledge intermediary, selects an evidence-based program with a strong research base, where we have reasonable expectations about how successful it will be. Private capital is solicited by a financial intermediary. That intermediary oversees the implementation of the program and tries to ensure that the model is implemented with fidelity. So we have an evidence-based model, and we want to make sure that we're putting it into place in ways that follow what the research literature says are effective. There's an independent evaluator who then determines whether those performance targets are met. And those performance targets tend to be very simple. They tend to be a single thing. Did we reduce jail bed days? Did we reduce recidivism? And government pays the intermediary if there's a successful outcome. So here's another way to sort of look at that in a graphic form. This pretty much says exactly what I just said before, but sometimes it's more helpful to see it this way. So the government engages with the knowledge intermediary. That's the very middle of the screen, who tries to figure out what problem is it that a jurisdiction is experiencing. Is there some evidence that supports a better intervention that isn't in place or a bigger intervention that isn't in place? What kind of performance targets are reasonable for that intervention to meet should it be put into place? How big the scale of it should be? What a fair price is on the deal? What kind of a return on investment is fair given what we know about how effective the program is? And then works with a financial intermediary who going up the column to the funders, and there's basically a negotiation between the government and the financial intermediary and the funders, along with the knowledge intermediary about, are these performance targets reasonable? Is the profit margin acceptable? Is the time frame acceptable? Is the scale of the intervention what everybody is willing to invest in? And when that negotiation is complete, a program is identified, the outcomes have been agreed upon by the parties involved in the transaction, and an independent evaluator then assesses over the course of time whether the program achieved what it was supposed to achieve and whether the investor should be paid back with the profit. So I just wanted to give some basic examples in justice about how this could operate. One way to think about this is doing different approaches to pretrial risk assessment, to do better risk assessments, to divert low-risk offenders from jail to community-based interventions. But in order to do these things that I think the research literature is pretty clear would save jurisdictions money, there's an upfront investment in both paying for the risk assessment, in training people how to use that risk assessment, in thinking about where in the process that risk assessment, given the community's risks and needs, fits best, and then thinking about whether there needs to be additional investments in community-based interventions where people who are diverted from jail can go and receive effective programs. The same is true on the reentry side. Therapeutic community, have a strong evidence base that they reduce recidivism and reduce substance abuse and all kinds of other outcomes. But again, these programs involve and require large upfront investments to develop all of the services, to implement them, to manage the data, to manage the flow of information across all the actors involved in these systems, and to put something in place that's sustainable and that has fidelity to evidence-based best practices. And so sort of none of these things have happened at the scale that we'd like because the scale of the investment up front is too substantial for current budget processes. And then I think you could make very similar arguments across all kinds of other adult justice system activities, more electronic monitoring in probation to reduce cost of incapacitation and reduce victimization, better infrastructure to support electronic monitoring and other data collaborations, all of which are enormously expensive, all of which are very difficult to make a political case for today. And then the same thing is true with adult diversion programs where we're trying to build a better community supervision network that better serves a population that is going to jail now, that could be diverted, that would be expected to have better outcomes were they treated in the community rather than detained. The juvenile justice side, I know, is not the focus of this particular call or most of the people on this particular call, but I think it does show the promise of these programs, in particular family-based interventions and prevention programs, like I said, multi-systemic therapy, family functional therapy, other family-based therapies, have been shown in the research literature to have tremendous returns on investments, in some places showing $8 or $10 or $15 in benefits for every dollar in cost. They are, however, enormously expensive, can cost up to $15,000 per kid per year, and the resources just simply aren't there to implement those kinds of programs today. And Pay for Success, SIF, social impact bonds, offers an opportunity to do that. So that's an overview of what this new transaction is and how it functions and who the actors are who are involved in each transaction. I should note a couple of things before I get into the advantages and the drawbacks. And one thing to note is that we have a very small number of these transactions in place today, only a handful, depending on how you count them. Each of those transactions today involves a different set of actors. The model that I put up there is sort of an idealized view of what we'd like the world to look like in 10 years so that we can maximize the potential for these transactions, but it isn't, it's more of a stylized view of the world than an actual representation of how these things are being put in place at this moment. But I think that, and Jenny Soff will talk about this, but the work of CNCS on SIF is going to really help to seed this field and quickly grow it. So let me just run through these advantages and drawbacks. The obvious advantage is government transfers the risk. At the moment, we don't even acknowledge the fact that government bears all the risk in creating and implementing new programs. It's implicit in everything that government does, but we don't ever actually acknowledge it, and we don't ever actually acknowledge that it's an impediment to scaling, to growth, to innovation, because anytime you have a single actor who bears all the risk of something, all of those things are going to be stifled. Local service networks are developed from scratch or scaled, which I think is very important. One of the great advantages of this program is that once those service networks are in place, they remain in place even after the transaction is complete. It allows agencies to pool resources and knowledge, and it provides significant flexibility to deploy programs across jurisdictions or regions. And what we mean by that is, you know, it's very difficult within a single government for one agency or even one part of an agency to communicate effectively with another part of the agency. And these kinds of transactions allow not only that kind of communication and knowledge transfer, but potentially knowledge transfer, communication, and service sector network development across governments. These, the main drawbacks are they're extremely complex to execute today. I think the transaction cost of doing one of these deals is coming down rapidly, but it's still very high. It requires a lot of expertise in multiple fields from multiple actors. We worry a little bit that philanthropy and particularly investment banks will just simply transfer their investment from what they're doing today, which might be very beneficial to these deals instead, which could be a big drawback if these deals fund things that aren't as effective as what we are doing today. So let me just walk through one of these deals in the next 5 minutes, and then I'll hand over the mic. So we really believe that Pay for Success relies on good strategic planning process. And we really believe that for this to be most effective, and again, this isn't us trying to represent the way these deals are coming together at this moment. This is us suggesting what an idealized world will look like as we move down this road. But if a jurisdiction identifies who is it, who are the people, families, and places that are driving the cost in their jurisdiction, and why it is, what the problems are that those people experience, and why there are gaps in services that allow them to continue to experience those problems and continue to drive the costs as a starting point, and that might identify 1 or 2 or 4 or 6 different areas that a government would really like to invest in to really substantially reduce its costs and scale effective programming, to figure out if there are evidence-based solutions to the problems that they just identified, and to determine if Pay for Success financing is the right way to get that program either built or scaled. We recommend having a research partner to assist in this process because a lot of the research is very complex, but it's not absolutely necessary. There are a lot of places that governments can go today. OJP's Crime Solutions, WISIP, Vanderbilt, Blueprints, There are a number of places that that you can go and find evidence-based promising or proven programs, and they also exist outside the justice sector in education and other places. Once you've identified the portfolio of programs that you want to put in place, you know, we say the strategic planning process is designed to happen every 5 years or 10 years or once a generation. This isn't a process that goes on continuously, but the portfolio of programs and the order in which the jurisdiction would like to implement them should be defined before any SIF, SIB, pay for success transaction is contemplated. And then once it's identified, it's a pretty pretty straightforward process to get the pay for success transaction developed. Price the product, make the deal, develop the infrastructure, deliver services and TA, and evaluate the program. And let me just say a word. I'm going to skip this one because I think I'm going a little long. Make the deal. 3 very small words that are very complicated. Here it's really important. We talked about the importance of having a knowledge intermediary. Here it's really important to have a good financial intermediary, somebody who can connect government to service providers and investors and speak each of those parties' language, which turns out to be a huge impediment here because the language spoken in philanthropy and venture capital and commercial banking is quite different from the language spoken by social service agencies and governments. And so having an intermediary to help translate is very helpful and to pull the transaction together. Try and identify what needs to be done to create the infrastructure that will be necessary to deliver the evidence-based program, and determine project management and the incentive structure. And, you know, as I said, most of the deals today are based on a single performance target. They don't need to be that way. They could be based on implementation measures. They could be like any other performance-based contract. They could be based on whatever all the parties agree to. And I think that's really the key point here, is that this really is, we call this performance-based contracting on steroids. But in essence, it is just a performance-based contract. It just involves different parties and different risk structures. Developing the infrastructure is really important here, especially when it comes to sharing knowledge and sharing information, and often requires new information technology systems and new collaborative networks among staff within and across agencies. And to determine the technical assistance needs. There are programs like the Family-Based Therapies and there's Family Partnership, where there are training and technical assistance providers that exist today in the community who can be contracted with to help implement with fidelity and evidence-based programs, but there may be other things that communities want to do where that training and technical assistance has to be developed from scratch at a local level. Having that training and technical assistance is, I think, critical to ensure that the model is implemented with fidelity. The great danger here is that people try and make well-intentioned and well-meaning changes to programs that have a strong evidence base, and in doing so make those problems weaker than they might have already been, and then the program doesn't meet its performance targets, the investors aren't paid off, and the whole structure of the SIF network in that place is put into jeopardy. So having training and technical assistance is really important, not only for any particular deal, but it's important to build the sector so that the next deal will work too. And then finally, evaluation, and here it's just, again, it's a matter of getting all parties to agree up front what the criteria is that are going to be used to evaluate the program. I just like to say randomized controlled trials, RCTs, are the best design. I think there's been a narrative that they're the most expensive design, and I don't actually believe that that's true. I think the thing to know going into an evaluation is that the cost of an evaluation are driven almost exclusively by the amount of data that needs to be collected and analyzed. And in many ways, randomized controlled trials, RCTs, require less data to be collected and might actually be, in many places, cheaper than some alternative ways of trying to use administrative data from legacy systems to figure out if a program met its targets. I apologize, the arrows I have to click are extraordinarily small. So the future of Pay for Success, I really do believe, I'm a researcher, so I obviously have a bias in this direction, but I think the extent to which we really focus on evidence-based programs, we really try and put a focus on implementing those programs with fidelity to the practices that we know work, will determine the extent to which the SIF-ready sector can be built and sustained and scaled. I think it's going to require a lot of new learning, and I think at this moment we might be underestimating how much governments, for-profits, and nonprofits need to learn in order to be able to collaborate. I think there are intermediaries in place that can help to do that and achieve that. And I think at the end of the day, this whole process really does offer a potentially transformative way of sharing resources and benefits. Here's our Impact Bond Resource Center. I'll leave this up and just speak for one last moment and just say this. What we really believe is that, and the reason why we've promoted this idea is that we believe that simply the process of preparing for a Pay for Success transaction, simply the process of identifying the outcomes that need to be achieved, the populations that are being underserved, the people, family, and places that are driving costs and not receiving services that would reduce costs to governments and citizens, to think about what appropriate performance targets are, to be able to say precisely what scale means. That process in and of itself could be potentially transformative, even if it never results in a Pay for Success transaction. So I will stop there. I thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you so much, John. Now we're going to turn it over to Jennifer Stoff from the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Okay, hello everyone, and Angela, thank you so much for having us, and a big thank you to Council of State Governments. It's really great to be here today and share with everyone who's on the webinar who we are at the Social Innovation Fund, how SIF is approaching Pay for Success, and share with you some real opportunities that are happening now for individuals and organizations that are participating or are interested in participating in Pay for Success. So as you see on the screen, the Social Innovation Fund is a key White House initiative and a program of the Corporation for National and Community Service, or CNCS, which is a federal agency. And SIF combines public and private resources to grow the impact of the most innovative community-based solutions that have compelling evidence of improving lives of people in low-income communities throughout the country. So SIF was founded on the fundamental idea that we can make big progress toward overcoming these significant challenges by finding and growing the most promising of these social solutions. And at its core, the SIF is really about finding the solutions that work and making them work for more people. So Pay for Success is just another tool, as John has been discussing, with the same mission. That mission is supporting innovation, ensuring solutions have the dollars needed to scale, and paying for results. So as part of 2014 congressional appropriations, SIF was given the authority to use up to 20% of our grant funding to implement a new competition to test Pay for Success approaches. And our Pay for Success program, as you can see on the slide, we have 3 goals with our Pay for Success program. The first is to strengthen and diversify the pipeline of government and nonprofit organizations that are ready and at the table ready to engage in Pay for Success. The second is to assess the potential of Pay for Success to address a wide variety of different issues, as John mentioned earlier, thinking about new geographic areas that Pay for Success has not been explored, and thinking about new social intervention areas that Pay for Success has not been explored. And the third is to attract new capital to the most high-performing of those institutions and organizations to find and to scale the most effective solutions facing low-income communities. And so the way that we're doing this is through 2 different approaches. The grantees that we're working with are taking one of these 2 different approaches on our Pay for Success program. So the first is by providing technical assistance to complete feasibility studies, or we say to assess the feasibility, and to develop pay for success capacity for state and local governments and for nonprofit organizations. And the second way that we're doing this through one of our grantees is through actually supporting the structuring of pay for success transactions themselves. So we believe that these activities will both contribute to the infrastructure necessary to implement future pay for success projects. Now, I am excited to introduce you to our 8 inaugural Pay for Success grantees. So as I mentioned last year, SIF has invested $12 million of federal funds among these 8 grantees. And what I really want to communicate is the depth and breadth of the Pay for Success program at SIF, that we're really looking to broaden the types of social interventions that Pay for Success is used for and where it's used across the country. So I want to just give you a sense of what each of these 8 grantees is doing, and you're going to hear from 2 of them on the webinar today. So the first one, and this is in alphabetical order, so not that we have any favorites at all. The first one is Corporation for Supportive Housing. You're going to hear from Stephanie Mercier in a few minutes. Corporation for Supportive Housing is providing technical assistance to government and nonprofit organizations to build their capacity to pursue pay for success pilots that improve outcomes and reduce costs for high-cost, vulnerable populations, so namely homeless individuals, youth, families, and disabled residents of healthcare institutions who are looking to live in the community. Second is the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, that is working with managed care organizations and hospitals in partnership with state governments and local governments on asthma prevention-related Pay for Success projects. The Harvard Kennedy School SIB Lab, Social Impact Bond Lab, their application is actually up and ready to go now. They are currently taking applications from state and local governments to have a full-time government innovation fellow work on the ground in state houses and city halls across the country to assess different areas of pay for success feasibility. The Institute for Child Success is working with state and local governments on pay for success programs to improve outcomes in the space of early childhood. National Council on Crime and Delinquency, and again, you will hear from Deirdre O'Connor. NCCD is working with state and local governments or nonprofit organizations to assess feasibility of pay for success projects in the arena of juvenile justice and child welfare, specifically looking at states with the highest disparity of racial and ethnic disparity across the country. The Nonprofit Finance Fund is one of our 8 grantees that's actually doing transaction structuring. They are providing sub-grants to support the actual structuring of pay for success projects that are ready to go and that are already underway and ready for deal stage. Third Sector Capital Partners is the second of our 8 competitions that are currently live. They are providing technical assistance to state and local governments to assess feasibility in a variety of topics clear across the country. And finally, the University of Utah Pay for Success Lab at the Business School at University of Utah is working with nonprofit organizations in the Intermountain West to provide technical assistance and support to ensure the successful development of these organizations to get ready for pay for success projects. So as I mentioned, our grantees are actually releasing their competitions between now and March 2015. So please do continue to check back on the Social Innovation Fund website for updates. This is a really exciting time for us, and we're so thrilled to be working with these incredible grantees who are offering this very, very meaningful and important technical assistance to grow the field of pay for success. So of course, happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar on the Social Innovation Fund or anything else that you're interested in. I will turn it back over to Angela.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Now we're going to hear from Deirdre at National Council on Crime and Delinquency.
Hello, everyone, and I'd also like to just start by thanking Angela and the Council on State Government for the opportunity to talk with the audience that's on this webinar. I'm going to be spending some time talking about our upcoming RFP that will be providing technical assistance to complete feasibility assessments. So before I get into that, I just want to provide a brief background on the National Council on Crime and Delinquency, the organization that I work for. NCCD promotes just and equitable social systems for individuals, families, and communities through research, public policy, and practice. We are a 100-year-plus national nonprofit with its foundation in the adult corrections system. Currently, we work in a variety of fields: the adult corrections system, juvenile justice, child welfare, adult protective services, TANF. So we're working across a variety of social service systems. What we're finding is that they're generally serving, if not the same families, then the same families within the same communities. And many of those communities are the lower income communities that are the target, one of the target populations that Jenny mentioned, for the Pay for Success funding, really supporting improvement in the lives of the members that live in those communities. So our RFP is going to, our project on these feasibility assessments for a Pay for Success transaction will focus on looking to improve racial disparity in child welfare and juvenile justice systems. This is a slight tangent from the general focus of the organizations that may be on the phone, but many of the communities and families impacted by reentry work are also impacted in one way or another by the juvenile justice or child welfare field. Sometimes it's the children within the same families that are involved with those systems. Sometimes the families impacted by reentry are trying to be a resource to extended family members or community members who are being impacted by child welfare or juvenile justice. And so, and as I mentioned, many of these are concentrated in the low-income communities across the country. When we talk about racial disparity in child welfare and juvenile justice, we're looking at the rate at which youth of color enter these systems as compared to their percentage of the general child population that are youth of color. And so what we see is that African American youth across the country enter foster care at over 2 times the rate. They're twice as likely to enter foster care as white children. Latino youth are in foster care about 20% more often than white children are. This rate varies widely across the country, although almost every state in the nation does have a higher rate of African American or Black children than white children in foster care, but some jurisdictions have very significant differences. New Mexico, it's youth of color are about 6 times as likely to enter foster care. In New York, that's in New York, they're about 6 times as likely to enter foster care. In DC, it's actually 60 times as likely. It's a very, very high rate of entry for youth, Black youth in the District of Columbia. Within the juvenile justice system, we also see high rates of disparity for youth of color. And what we wanted, and the data also demonstrates that in the juvenile justice system, the disparity increases at almost every decision point. So whether Black youth are more likely to be stopped by police, then if they are stopped, they're more likely to be arrested or taken in. They're less likely to be diverted out of a criminal justice or of a juvenile justice system, and more likely to be held while the trial, held before trial, having pre-trial detention. They're also more likely to be found guilty or detained in the system and to go into deeper end detained settings. And when we look at the youth that experience both juvenile justice and foster care systems, we see that those youth in particular have very high rates of negative life outcomes. So the opportunity to change the trajectory of these youth's lives exists, and it seems, we believe that there would be strong fiscal savings as well as improved life outcomes. We are one of the 8 Social Innovation Fund Pay for Success grantees, as Jenny mentioned. We will be opening up a competitive RFP within the next few weeks. And what we're going to be looking at is selecting 3 jurisdictions to provide feasibility assessments to, so we will be providing providing technical assistance, and this technical assistance will help the jurisdictions that we select reduce some of the cost of determining whether or not a pay-for-success transaction will work for the programmatic changes that they're interested in making. We are looking for jurisdictions that are interested in implementing a positive youth development intervention. And when we talk about a positive youth development intervention, the same resources that John mentioned are resources that you could go to. So the Blueprints website and some of the other resources that he mentioned are the same resources you can go to look for some of those evidence-based interventions. The positive youth development interventions are ones that focus on improving youth success in school, active citizenship, productive work, healthy and safe lives. So it's not a specific strategy or a specific structure in the intervention. It's looking at what the intervention, at the target outcomes for those interventions. It's not something like family or nurse-family partnerships where there are specific targeted behaviors and strategies and activities that the service provider would have to be held to. So there are a variety of different interventions that are considered positive youth development interventions. And we're looking for jurisdictions that would focus on implementing these strategies with the goal of reducing racial disparity in the child welfare and or juvenile justice systems in their area. I'm going to bounce to the second slide real quickly, and I'll go back in a minute. When we developed our application to SIF for one of their Pay for Success awards, we looked at how we may be able to focus our work and determined that it was going to be important that we try and focus on the 10 or 12 jurisdictions that had the highest rates of disparity in juvenile justice and or child welfare across the country. And so the eligible state and local or tribal governments or nonprofits for our upcoming RFP are ones that are located in California, Connecticut, the District of Columbia, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, or Wisconsin. We do appreciate that there are going to be jurisdictions outside of these 11 states and DC that are interested in addressing disparities in their child welfare, juvenile justice field, and we would certainly encourage those to think about some of the other Pay for Success, feasibility assessment, technical assistance opportunities that are out there, or to contact us and we can talk with you about trying to find other sources of funding for those type of feasibility assessment activities. But our RFP is going to be open to those 11 states in the District of Columbia. We are looking to release our RFP in early December, and I know it is early December, and so it's going to be coming out very shortly within the next week or two, so please pay attention, and we will also ask if the council and state government can support us in getting word out to those that are on this call. We will be asking that those interested parties submit a letter of intent in early January. The close date for our RFP is going to be the end of January, January 30th. We'll go through a peer review process once we've received all the applications, and we'll do phone interviews with the top proposals. We're actually hoping to do those at the end of February. This slide says mid-March, but we are hoping to be able to get those in at the end of February so that we can make a decision, contact the awardees, and finalize the memorandums of understanding that we need to sign at the end of March. Our RFP, I just want to clarify, is one where the selected recipients would receive services from NCCD and our award partners, which include the Raven Group, City University of New York, Potrero Impact Investing, and Kirkland & Ellis. The selected recipients would not receive any funding to support their commitment to completing the feasibility assessment. So the memorandum of understanding would really be that the local government agency, or if there was a very well integrated nonprofit that wanted to be the lead agency, that they would be committing to making sure that everyone who needed to be available and the data that needed to be available to complete the feasibility assessment would be made available. So there wouldn't be funding on the table. It's that the agency would be receiving services from NCCD and our award partners. So I think that the intent of me being on the call was really to ensure that you all had an opportunity to hear about one of the upcoming opportunities to engage in a feasibility assessment for Pay for Success. Again, it's not specifically around adult reentry, but it is one that is certainly has the ability to impact a community that would be the same type of target community. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Angela, and I would be available for questions at the end of the call as well.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. That was really informative and a very exciting opportunity, as you said, in the field of juvenile justice. Now we're going to turn over to Stephanie at Corporation for Supportive Housing to talk about their project and their specific, what they're specifically looking for in their Social Innovation Fund project. Okay.
Great. Good afternoon. This is Stephanie Mercier with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you all today. With many, or if not all of the panelists on the call today, we're very excited about Pay for Success and some of these exciting new opportunities and the way in which it represents a really exciting opportunity to scale interventions that are evidence-based and that work. But before I jump into telling you about our thoughts and opportunity as it relates to Pay for Success, I just wanted to take a moment and introduce CFH. We're a national nonprofit intermediary, and we have teams, both teams that are focused on specific states as well as those that are focused nationally. And our National Government Affairs and Innovations team, which is where I sit, works to identify and test tools like social impact financing that can help communities that are working to meet the housing needs of their most vulnerable citizens. And in that sort of broad vein, CSH has project-specific financing and expertise around creating supportive housing. We do capacity building and technical assistance to strengthen and expand the supportive housing industry, and then public policy reform to help build an efficient system for producing and financing supportive housing. And now that I've said the term supportive housing about 7 or 8 times already, I want to pause and just make sure that we all have a common understanding about what that is as an intervention. So CSH defines it as a model that is targeted to households who may have barriers to housing and or employment, that is affordable, provides tenants with leases, engages those tenants in flexible and voluntary services, is one of its hallmarks is really coordinating among key partners like service providers, property managers, developers or owners to create that partnership that works to help ensure folks can stay housed, and then supports tenants in connecting with the community. So in very broad terms, it works to provide stable, affordable housing connected to comprehensive services for people who would otherwise have difficulty obtaining or sustaining supportive housing, or sustaining housing, excuse me. And it fits well, at least in our opinion, into this Pay for Success space, as you've heard defined by many of the other panelists, in terms of having a strong evidence base that helps us to show and demonstrate that it, in fact, works to produce positive outcomes. So for those of you who, like me, love seeing numbers, you'd want to see with any intervention that you select for social impact investment that there are studies showing that it's effective. And with supportive housing, we see that particularly in terms of promoting housing stability and reducing the use of expensive crisis and health services. So when we look across studies, we see things like supportive housing working to keep individuals housed. So that number that shows us that most folks stay housed for a year or more, even when we include persons who may have chronic experiences with being homeless or in and out of systems, for example. We see reductions in things like Medicaid costs and use of, again, of crisis services like detox, significant perhaps to some of you on the phone, given your focus, is that we see significant reduction in jail days. And then more specifically, when we look at some of the supportive housing pilots that have been focused on reentry, like one that we have done over a number of years with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, we see significant statistics like folks are 60% less likely to be reincarcerated if they participate in the supportive housing pilot. And then in Denver, as an example, among chronically homeless folks, there was a 76% reduction in the number of days spent in jail. And in fact, Denver is engaged and moving forward with a social impact investment-related effort focused on that population, which they call front-end users, and looking at some of those outcomes like promoting housing stability and reducing number of days spent in jail. So I want to take a moment and tell you a little bit about our most recent opportunity as it relates to Pay for Success, which we're very excited about. As with the information that Deirdre shared, we are lucky enough to be one of the 8 grantees who were awarded funds as part of the SIF PFS grant that you heard Jenny describe in broad terms. And we received $750,000 over 3 years, which will be matched on a one-to-one basis for a total available amount of $1.5 million. And the only reason that matters is that it allows us to work with up to 12 grantees over that period of time. And we're specifically focusing on jurisdictions that are interested in exploring the feasibility of a PFS initiative focused on supportive housing and vulnerable populations. And I'll give you some examples in a moment of what those vulnerable populations might be. In our first round of competition, which is coming up very soon in December, so please do keep an eye out and we'll make sure you get information when that RFP is released. We are aiming to select between 4 to 6 subrecipients. That's the term at play for the partners that we get to work with to provide technical assistance with. And governments as well as nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply. But in the case of nonprofit organizations, we're really looking at those that are bringing those government partners to the table and serving as a catalyst to kind of bring some of those key stakeholders to be part of the conversation. So as I mentioned, we are anticipating releasing our application this month in the very near future, and then having applications due back at the beginning of February. And the RFP and related materials will provide all of the opportunities within that in terms of informational webinars and when things like letters of intent are due. And I wanted to also just mention to folks, I know some of the other panelists have touched on this, but you've heard this term feasibility technical assistance kind of thrown around a few times now. And, you know, I think this is a really exciting opportunity to really think about what the specific needs might be of a Pay for Success initiative that a given jurisdiction might propose. But if we look at kind of the bucket of things that we could work together to do, we'd be thinking about working together to ensure that the right folks are at the table across a broad range of stakeholders, reviewing and analyzing data that can help us understand the cost related to the target population, what they cost us today in the status quo, working to design a high-quality intervention. You heard a lot of folks mention the importance of ensuring that you are designing a model and implementing it with fidelity to a given intervention. And so in our case, that's supportive housing, but of course that could vary depending on what you're looking at in your particular community. And then selecting, in our instance, housing and service providers who would be able to implement that high-quality supportive housing. Developing a financial model and framework that helps to outline what the potential is for cost savings or to avoid other costs. There's different ways in which that can be designed, and looking at the role of success payments within that. And then creating RFPs to select key partners like evaluators and or intermediaries, or of course also service providers. And I jumped over this too quickly, but also wanted to just mention, as we think about vulnerable populations that might make particular sense in conjunction with supportive housing, we've called out 4 in particular, although are open to conversations with communities that may have identified particular populations that aren't within this group. But when we look at those who can both benefit from supportive housing as well as realize cost savings when compared to their status quo setting, we're looking at folks who are super utilizers of health or other crisis resources, including resources like jail, as we mentioned, residents of healthcare institutions who might prefer to live in the community, so that population of persons who are now in institutional settings but could and would like to live in a more integrated and independent community setting. Families who have high utilization of the child welfare system, who are really in a situation of engaging with that for the long term or repeatedly. And then also young adults who are homeless in foster care and or in the juvenile justice system. So those are four where we see particularly high potential when combined with the Pay for Success model and supportive housing. With that, I want to again thank the Council of State Governments Justice Center for the opportunity to talk with you and turn it back over to Angela, and would of course be delighted to answer questions as we move into the Q&A section.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate your time in talking about your specific project. What we're going to do next is we're actually going to do a quick poll that will just show up again on the right-hand bottom part of the screen, just so that we can get a better sense of feedback from the audience about information that they learned today. So there are two questions. The first question is, please indicate whether you are interested in applying for this Feasibility Assessment Technical Assistance Project. So the project either at Corporation for Supportive Housing or the project coming out of National Council on Crime and Delinquency. So it would be great if you could just indicate, we'd love to just know how many of the folks on the call today actually are interested in going forward potentially in applying. And then the second question is, based on today's webinar, what are future topics that you'd be interested in learning more about regarding this topic of Pay for Success? So we have included here an information, a webinar on social enterprise models, a webinar on other innovative funding mechanisms, and then choice C is a Tier 1 webinar, a more advanced webinar, Pay for Success, or which could possibly be a little more interactive or with a smaller audience. So please take the next 15 seconds just to answer these questions. Great. And now we'll just see here some of the feedback regarding those who are interested in potentially applying. We've seen like there's about 25% undecided, 50% that are really thinking about it. As far as future webinars on this topic, it looks like folks are interested in learning about other innovative funding mechanisms that are rated about 34%, and also about social enterprise models that are rated about 28%, as well as a Tier 1 webinar going forward. So that's really exciting to hear and also to see, and we appreciate everyone's feedback on that. Okay, so now we're going to jump into questions and answers for the remaining sort of 20 minutes or so of the webinar. And our first question is for Dr. John Roman. So this question is, how do you get the players in a Pay for Success contract, particularly the players like a government agency or private investors, how do you get them to the table to participate in this kind of model? And what are some lessons learned that you can share to help jurisdictions that are unable to get these types of players at the table?
So I think it's a great question. I think it is the question. So the way it's worked so far is that there have been some charismatic person somewhere among the list of participants in these transactions. In some places it's been a government person, in some places it's been a commercial person who's really sort of leveraged everybody else into the transaction. But I think with all the work that CNCS is doing and you know, with all the possible sub-grantees that will come out of the CNCS SIF work, and there could be, you know, there will be dozens, there could be up to 100, I would guess, that there'll be enough of a proof of concept that people will start to really take this idea seriously, and they won't see it as an innovation, but rather as the beginning of a new way to do business. I think from the government perspective, It's, it's about making it easy, right? So if I'm a budget director and I hear about this idea, I probably recoil in horror because I have to think about, changing my procurement systems in order to be able to do this, and it looks like a big lift. But if you can say no, CNCS has grantees that have dealt with all the issues that you're thinking about, then it becomes very easy for them to say yes because they get capital and they shift risk. If you're an investment bank and you have your new Community Revitalization Act, CRA requirements that require you to invest in disadvantaged communities where you do business, then it's very easy to say yes to Pay for Success because it qualifies as a CRA activity. It helps you meet government regulations. And, if you're a philanthropy, it's really easy to get people to the table to say yes because what you tell them is, hey, I'm going to mute myself. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm really sorry. And it's really easy to say yes because you get to leverage your giving, and if you're a social service provider, it's really easy to say yes because it allows you to scale practices that you have evidence to believe are already effective. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, John.
Sorry about the phone ringing.
No problem, no problem. A similar question related to that is, as far as for folks who are interested in, one of the questions, a bunch of questions that came up is, how do we find an intermediary? How do we find players to help us sort of galvanize, as you said, the charismatic champions at the table? What is the role of government in finding an intermediary?
Is that for me as well?
Yes, John, sorry.
Sure. So I think, at the end of the day, government has to be the catalyst for these transactions, and they have to be the catalyst in one of two ways. They either have to be the catalyst in the sense that they're the ones going out looking for partners to do these transactions. They can also be a catalyst by listening when people come to them with great ideas. So there's a couple of ways that these things come together. And one is through federal involvement, which has been absolutely critical. One is through philanthropic involvement, which is people like the Rockefeller Foundation, who have lots of resources, and Nonprofit Finance Fund, NFF, have lots of resources. One is through governments just deciding that they want to do one of these deals and talking to one of the financial intermediaries, and they're pretty easy to find. One is third sector, which is a CNCS grantee and was listed in the presentation, and the other big one right at the moment is social finance. And both of them, I think, would be happy to take a call from a government that was interested in doing one of these things. And then, there's sort of another vision for this whole thing that I think is really important, which is the idea that you could pull together a deal where all of the actors involved, the financial intermediary, the social service provider, and the funders come to government with a big transaction. And so this is an idea that caffeinated capital that a guy named Steve Goldberg has been promoting, that I think has a lot of enormous potential. And so, there's ways that big deals come to governments, and there's ways for governments to go to social finance and third sector. I know I'm repeating myself. I want to make sure people get a chance to write these down. And then there's the idea of being open to what other people have done. And if you go to payforsuccess.org, you'll see a map that has all the actors who are contemplating one of these transactions in one form or another. And there is a community of practice that is developing, and Jenny can speak to that, where government people at the sort of chief of staff, policy director level are having conversations about how they are getting into these transactions and how they're making decisions about how to make them work.
Great, thank you, John. And that's a great segue then, Jenny. One of the questions has been, so my organization doesn't qualify for these grant opportunities that were described. Can you tell us a little bit about other upcoming pay for success opportunities, or sort of what's the plan on the federal level for pay for success as a catalyst to support this kind of work?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for that question. I completely understand that if you feel that after listening to Deirdre and Stephanie's presentations, you don't quite fit into the mold of exactly what NCCD and CSH is looking for. As I mentioned, so we have 8 grantees right now that are, if 2 of them, the Harvard Social Impact Fund Lab, SIB Lab, and Third Sector Capital Partners are actively looking for applicants for their competitions. We have 6 more of those competitions that are coming down the pipeline in, between a week and 3 months. So it's really important to continue visiting our website, which is nationalservice.gov/SIF, S-I-F. And along the left side of our website, you'll see all of the Pay for Success grantees and the various requests for proposals that are live and active. I would echo what John said. The really interesting and exciting thing about this movement right now is that folks are interested in exploring Pay for Success for a whole different variety of types of interventions. So again, not only looking at juvenile justice and child welfare, homelessness, but looking into early childhood, asthma prevention, just a whole host of different things that will make a real impact among low-income communities and communities in need. So certainly visiting the SIF website is a great start.
Great, thank you. And so you mentioned your website, Jenny, so I'm assuming that would be the place for people to go to find that, to get links to the RFPs for these grant opportunities and for the other upcoming ones.
Yep, that's right. So both our website, again, that's nationalservice.gov/SIF, S-I-F, and then you can look at the Pay for Success page. And again, to echo what John just mentioned a minute ago, the Nonprofit Finance Fund has a tremendous online toolkit that is basically it's a wonderful collection of resources and other interesting things for you to look at. Their website is payforsuccess.org. It's pretty easy to remember. So Nonprofit Finance Fund is also updating their website in real time as the RFPs come out, so you can look both at our website and Nonprofit Finance Fund's website at payforsuccess.org.
Great, thank you so much. One question also, I guess, for Corporation for Supportive Housing and NCCD, do you have any guidance or any information that you'd like to further provide to the audience about your specific RFP opportunities as far as the types of grantees you're looking to support? So, Stephanie, if you'd like to start, that would be great. If there's anything else you wanted to add in addition to what you've shared already.
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is Stephanie. So we, in terms of eligible applicants, and again, we'll make sure that folks get access to the actual RFP and details that we'll share more. But broadly speaking, we're looking for applicants who are at any level of government, so state, city, county, and nonprofits who are working to bring some of the government partners to the table. So nonprofit organizations are eligible as well.
Great, thank you. And Deirdre, do you have anything else you could add about who's eligible, again, to apply for your RFP or anything that you're looking for specifically?
So we, similar to Stephanie, we are interested in hearing from states, cities, counties, so any level of government or nonprofits that are looking to try and bring this type of funding to a jurisdiction to expand positive youth development strategy as a way for impacting the racial disparity in juvenile justice and child welfare. It doesn't have to be a juvenile justice or child welfare agency, the public agency. It could be a nonprofit. It could be, you know, a mayor's office. It could be county council. It could be the, you know, Department of Administration, who handles the grants and contracting, who puts forth the application. So it could be any type of government agency, but the focus would be on improving, reducing racial disparity, improving outcomes for the youth that are involved in juvenile justice or child welfare. And I know that there were some questions about how did we, you know, how did we select the 12 jurisdictions, or why some jurisdictions weren't on there. And I'd be happy to have more one-on-one conversations with folks about that. Even internally, there were some conversations about how we should best identify those most in where we felt like we could have the most impact. And I think one of the pieces does go back to John's statement that in terms of pay for success financing, the best opportunity to realize the cost savings that really make it a pay for success style transaction is that there would be a large population that would be impacted. And so while there are lots of jurisdictions where it's the right thing to do to provide positive youth development services to youth that are in child welfare or juvenile justice, and we would certainly support the implementation of those, it may be something that gets supported through a method other than pay for success financing.
Great, thank you. And I think one of the things that struck me was when in remarks provided by John is that even if you do not end up going through and having a pay for success project, but part of going through the process of reviewing your feasibility and reviewing your capacity is also very worthwhile for jurisdictions looking to infuse and invest in evidence-based programs at their agencies or in their organizations. Speaking again just with Stephanie and Deirdre, one of the audience members has asked about tell us a little bit more about what are the components of a feasibility study if they were selected, and was curious if one of you could talk a little bit about what that would entail as far as what would be the expectations for the grantee as well as for yourself.
I think that I really appreciate Stephanie's slide that she put up there about the activities that she saw as part of the feasibility assessment. I think those match very closely what'll be in our RFP, and we're going to have, a detailed list that includes the work that we would look to accomplish in the feasibility assessment. It may be that some of those steps are have already been accomplished in the jurisdiction that gets selected. So convening stakeholders, engaging and facilitating and developing a project plan for completing the feasibility assessment. Identifying the target population. We already can identify that we'll be working with jurisdictions that are interested in improving outcomes for youth and juvenile justice or child welfare, but there may be subpopulations within that, or it may be in a specific part of a large county. So if, Los Angeles County wanted to come in and do this, it may not be the entire county. They may focus on a couple of the neighborhoods. So identifying the target population. Looking at articulating the anticipated impact and cost savings. The actual cost-benefit analysis is going to be a big piece of the feasibility assessment, and that's going to require data sharing and strong data analysis. But it's likely going to require data sharing among agencies to look at the improved, looking at school-based outcomes, at healthcare-based outcomes, or comparing juvenile justice data and child welfare data. So some of the data sharing agreements would be a piece that we would look to support and facilitate. Developing a high-level evaluation design, early cultivation of funder interest. One of the things that we're hearing from the impact investor that's partnered with us on our award is that many of the impact investors are interested in hearing about these projects earlier than later, and so they don't necessarily want someone to come to them with a fully cooked plan and say, would you like to invest in this? And the investors are thoughtful about the length of time that it can take to get through the conversations and the analysis to a deal development. So early cultivation of funder interest, I think, is a big piece of work that that's sort of one of those new tasks that some government agencies might not quite have completely figured out how to do or who's the right investor to approach. So that's another piece of work that I know we would include in our feasibility assessment. And with that, I'll let Stephanie comment on what else she may see.
I think that's great, and Deirdre's points are exactly right. That any one of these, in addition to those activities that Deirdre listed, and I completely agree about the early cultivation of interested investors being important too, may be more of the focus of work in a given jurisdiction. So some jurisdictions are basing their interest on existing data that shows cost savings for a particular target population. And so in that case, more of the work might focus on then understanding how to design and deliver a high-quality intervention for that group and how we're going to target success payments. In other places, there may need to be more work to cultivate those data sharing arrangements and to kind of get our arms around what the data that will allow us to determine what is the status quo cost for this population in a given system or systems, and how do we move that across. So I think both our sense, and I'm guessing that of all of the grantees, is that there are a set of kinds of options that we can work together to do as part of the technical assistance, but exactly what happens and how much time is spent on each is going to vary depending on the needs and interests of each particular jurisdiction that is coming to the table.
Great, thank you. And this may be also in the RFP, but as far as the time period or the length that would be involved in the feasibility study for the grantees that are the winners, so to speak, of these RFPs, what is the time period of the feasibility study? How long would it take?
So our estimates are 12 to 18 months, and again, that can vary somewhat, but we're viewing the initial term as approximately a year with the opportunity to extend that term if needed based on that particular jurisdiction. But again, that's another place where it may vary. Some jurisdictions may move more quickly, and others may encounter things along the way that cause it to take a little bit longer.
Great. Well, that's all for now. We have, I first just want to once again thank Stephanie and Deirdre and Jenny and John for taking the time out to do this presentation and be involved in all the prep calls. We'd be very happy to share the archive of this webinar recording to the audience through the National Reentry Resource Center website. It'll be available within a week, and please note that, once again, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter or other announcements, please visit CSG Justice Center, and definitely visit the websites of our partner organizations that participated today, including Urban Institute, National Council on Crime and Delinquency, Corporation for Supportive Housing, as well as the Corporation for National and Community Service. It's really an exciting time to be able to bring these kinds of resources to bear to the justice systems across the country, and so we're hoping that folks enjoyed the presentations today and will be reaching back to us for any questions that you may have in order to help you with this work in the future. Thank you very much again. My name is Angela Tolosa. I'm here from the National Reentry Resource Center, and we look forward to working with you all and listening to your questions and participating with you in future webinars. Thank you very much.